Hey YouTube, Kira Qualia here, bringing you all my future card Buddyfight, Godpunks, Danger World deck profile for November 2021. I wanted to continue doing the different Buddyfight Ace deck profiles, updating the Godpunks is one I've been planning on doing for quite a while, so big thanks to my buddy Jim for letting me borrow his deck for the deck profile. The whole point of the Godpunks deck is to use the Plunder ability to basically take your opponent's resources and use them for your own to either summon out your units onto the field. All the different monsters, all the different items, all have different plunder abilities that you can make full use of with this deck. A very, very interesting take and unique one at that, even for the game of future card Buddyfight. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So with our flag being Danger World and our main go-to buddy being the Top Fist Vainglory Brawl Zeus, with this card being a powerhouse unit for the deck and being your main go-to unit that you'll summon out with your plunder ability. With it, we are running 3 copies of this unit normally in the deck. I'm not running a maxed out copy for the buddy unit, which I'll get to in just a bit, mostly because of our setup in the deck. This card relies on the playstyle of using plunder by putting a card from your opponent's field into the drop zone, and your opponent pays 1 gauge and your opponent also pays 1 life. With plunder, when this card attacks and destroys your opponent's monster or deals damage to your opponent, you deal 2 damage to your opponent and you gain 2 life. So that is the plus with plunder. You take away their resources, using it to call out this card, and then just giving you more additional resources in the form of life, but also being able to deal damage to your opponent. It doesn't have double attack or triple attack, but it still can make a pretty big mark against your opponent by just taking away their own resources to use. With the newest card being the option for Sky Crashing Deity Strike, Brawl Zeus, you put 2 cards in total from your field and your opponent's field into the drop zone. So it could be either you or your opponent's field. With this card, this is the one that came out from Buddy Ragnarok. When this card attacks and destroys your opponent's monster or deals damage to your opponent chooses and puts a hand card into their gauge. If your opponent puts a card, you draw a card. And this card has double attack, so that much more scary when it attacks, having the option to do this twice against your opponent. And with that option, being able to also use your own resources, you're not as limited to when you would summon out your original Brawl Zeus onto the field, because you still have the option to use your own cards as well as your own opponent, even if your opponent doesn't have the resources to use with this card. The same premise is also with the top tier Deity's Might Brawl Zeus. This card gives you the option of paying a total of any 2 gauge, so even your own if your opponent doesn't have the gauge to use. If you summoned out another Brawl Zeus plunder, when this card attacks, you drop one of your opponent's gauge and put the top card of your deck into your gauge, and at the end of your turn, if your opponent has 1 or less gauge, put a card from your opponent's field into the drop zone. So if you used enough of their resources, that's where this card comes in handy. It also has double attack, so you can take away your opponent's own resources to use still using this card. So very, very useful all around, being able to take care of gauge while your original Brawl Zeus takes care of your opponent's life, and the newest one, the Sky Crashing Deity Strike Brawl Zeus, takes care of your opponent's hand. For some of the other units we were running in the deck, also running 2 of the incomparable Tenki Zagagagia, or Zagagagaya, I believe is how you pronounce it. You pay 2 opponent's gauge and put the top card of your deck into its soul. If you have a weapon equipped, this card's size on the field is reduced by 2, making it a size 1, so it works perfectly with Brawl Zeus as well. And other than during your opponent's start phase, when a number of cards in your opponent's hand increases, your opponent chooses a card from their hand and drops it. This ability only activates once per turn, but having Penetrate, Double Attack, and Soul Guard with a critical of 3 makes it a scary unit to go up against your opponent. Also, just limiting the size of their hand if they were trying to make it any more bigger with any of their spells or monsters, you name it. For some of the other units, for more of the recycle power with all of our different Godpunks, I'm also running 4 Dysfunctional Gihihaya, I believe is how you pronounce. Once again, butchering these names, but you choose up to 2 Godpunk monsters with different sizes in your drop zone other than Dysfunctional, and you may pay 1 gauge, rest this card, and put the chosen cards into your hand. So with it, you have the gauge to pay being your own, but then you have the resources to take of your opponents to then reuse and call out all the different size Godpunks we already use in the deck, being the size 3 Zugagagaya or your many different size 2 Brawl Zeus. or one of the size 1 options, also running 4 of the Crazed Girl deity Gothiris. Your opponent cannot call cards or monsters from the drop zone. When this card attacks, if your opponent has 1 or less gauge, your opponent chooses and drops a hand card. So it can take away your opponent's gauge, but also have the resources for limiting your opponent from calling cards from the drop zone. Depending on the deck that they are playing, this can be a great way just to shut down your opponent of all their preferred play styles. And for more of your opponent's setup, so that they have the gauge for you to use, also running 4 Thrasher Daipan. When this card enters the field, put the top card of your opponent's deck into their gauge, and then put 2 cards from your deck into your gauge. Then if you have another Godpunk on the field, you draw 1 card. Setup for all your different plays. This is a definite 4 of, along with all the many different other cards we're running for the deck, and it comes in handy just being the fact that we have this option available to us for giving our opponent resources if we just, let's say, use them up too quickly with some of our other Brawl Zeus we may call out. For some of the 1-ofs to finish off the monsters, I am also running 1 of the Roaring Hydra, more of the discard power. If our opponent has, when this card attacks and destroys an opponent's monster or deals damage, you drop 1 of your opponent's gauge. If not, your opponent chooses and drops a hand card. So if they have that resource to drop, this card comes in handy, but also running 1 of the My Buddy. If you wanted to up the number of the original Brawl Zeus we're running, you can take this card out for that copy. It does come in handy for the 1 impact we're running, which I'll get to in just a bit. But for the items, we're also running 2 of the newest item, and that is Bash Golden Bat Hermes Bat. You put a Godpunk from your drop zone into its soul, pay 1 opponent's gauge. This card can attack even if a Godpunk's on the center, and all Godpunk monsters on your field cannot be destroyed or returned to hand by your opponent's card effects, and all original size 2 Godpunks on your field get size reduced by 2. This gives you the option to then call out multiple Brawl Zeus on the field, making them size 0 on the field, having all of these different plunder options against your opponent. For the spells, we are running 4 of the All Is Mine. You pay 1 gauge, put up to 1 Godpunk monster or item from your deck to your hand. Shuffle your deck. You only cast All Is Mine once per turn. It's why we're only running 2 of the Bat. It's really all you need because you can search out with this card. If you already have the item, then you can search out 1 of your preferred monsters to add to your hand. So this is a definite 4 of just being easy search power altogether. For more protection against our opponent, I am also running 4 of the Scariest Stare. You may only cast this if a Godpunk is on your field. Counter, choose a card from your opponent's field, and for this turn, the chosen card gets critical -3. If the chosen card's critical is 0, you draw a card. So just once again, for the turn means you can take down an opponent's monster that much more easily, being able just to reduce that critical. It may have multiple attacks, but if it's trying to attack straight into you, there's not much they can do against you having a 0 critical monster. And I also run 3 Immortal Speech. You may only cast this if you have a Godpunk on your field. You pay 2 gauge, your opponent chooses and drops a hand card, and you draw 2 cards. So not only does it give you a draw 2, it also takes away resources your opponent may have. And going first just means you can take away more and more from your opponent, being a once per turn, but still giving you more chance to draw into needed cards to use to set up your plunder plays against your opponents. And for some of the other numbers, 3 Top Dread Extortion. You may only cast this if you have a Godpunk monster on your field. Put the top card of your opponent's deck into their gauge, then look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put up to 1 card from among them into your hand, and put the rest into your gauge. More setup, but also giving your opponent that setup just like your Daipan can give you more resources to use and search power depending on a card you may need to add to your hand. For some other numbers, also running 3 of the members only Club Dead Deity. This can either give you a gauge resource setup or make your opponent drop hand cards at the start of each one of their turns. So getting this card set up on the field is a big part of the playstyle because then you can rely on it to then either have you be in control of your own plays or make sure your opponent just doesn't have the resources to get back into their hands. If they only have 1 card to draw each turn, they're going to have to discard it for this card, just not have the resources to come back from it. I also run 3 Junk Wheels. This is more of a defense card. You choose and use one of the following 2. Destroy up to 2 monsters on your opponent's field. If you destroyed any, draw a card, or drop all soul from an opponent's monster on the field. So if your opponent's attacking and they doesn't have a monster with Soul Guard, you can use this card to destroy that card, and all you have to do is destroy a Godpunk on your field and pay 1 gauge. So it gets rid of other resources that you can just call over again with new Brawl Zeus or other different Godpunks next turn. And to finish up some of the numbers for the spells, 3 of the newest one being Strongest Legend Top Fist. You pay 1 gauge and 1 life. You only cast this during each player's attack phase. You choose and use 2 Godpunk monsters with different names from your drop zone and call them to separate areas. So this gives you the option to plunder and use Brawl Zeus during your opponent's turn, taking away the resources resources, maybe immediately after they called them out onto the field. To finish off the deck with our impacts, I am running 2 of the Absolute Power. I believe it's Gildaros Extermination. You pay 4 gauge, and you only cast this if a Godpunk's on the field. Deal 3 damage to your opponent. Gain 3 life. Your opponent chooses to drop 2 hand cards. It's basically plunder the impact, and you also draw 2 cards. So, once again, it's what the art shows of the card. A bully taking what they want from, I would say, more of the scum in the Buddyfight series altogether. And lastly, for 1 more impact, it is the Wise Move. This card comes in handy if you have the My Buddy card in the drop zone, giving you the option to call it out onto the field or any of the size 1 monsters we run in the deck. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Once again, thanks again to my buddy Jim for letting me borrow the Brawl Zeus Godpunk deck. For the deck profile, I'll definitely be looking forward to some other updates I can do for future card buddy fight in the future, so look forward to them. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Qualia out.